All right. Well, hey everybody. It's pretty late actually. I should be in bed by now. It's after midnight, but I had a few emails tonight about the film assignment due next week. And because it is due less than a week, I didn't want to wait too much longer. So I thought, all right, I'll put this together. So I kind of quickly put together a PowerPoint um, just to give you some ideas. So this is kind of off the cuff. But like I said, I know some of you have never done anything like this before, So right off the bat, just remember you're looking at a movie as a historical artifact. Remember, in history, everything's history. So sometimes we use paintings, we might use a novel. Obviously, we talked about archives, and I talked about letters that we might look at, but or photograph. A movie is a historical artifact. It's something that was created. Maybe you're watching a film from 1977. I'm going to talk about one or two movies from that year tonight. So it was a movie that was created in 1977. So again, it's a primary source from that period. So the actors, the writers, the director, they're all from 1977. I mean, everything you see was. So not only is it a product of its time, but it was also, like literally created in 77, but it was for an audience of 1977. So it also tells you a little bit about who the audience was, what was considered normal to them in 1977, what was considered abnormal. You look at things like who are the villains of the movie, who are the heroes of the movie, you know, w- when it comes to humor, what's being made fun of. So again, you're watching a movie, but you're not just watching a movie like you normally would. You're not, you do get into the story a little bit, but you're also kind of stepping back and saying, again, what does this movie say about the time in which it was created? And there's no rules here. Again, I think this is why some students do have because I've done this before, so I know that students get a little nervous because there's kind of no guideposts. You're coming up with the idea of what you're going to write about. I made you watch a particular movie, but you're the one coming up with how you're going to analyze this. But again, you're doing it thinking about this as a historical artifact. So right off the bat, and I'm not being sarcastic, first thing is read the assignment. Make sure, 'cause, again, I'm not saying that the people that emailed me hadn't done that, but I know a lot of times in other classes, I'm always surprised how many students haven't actually just sat down and just read the assignments, because I know I give you some pointers there. The other thing to do is watch the movie. I mean, even before you think about how you're going to analyze it, just literally watch the movie. And I like to think a lot of you have already done this. I got a feeling most of you haven't, but just literally sit down, spend the 90 minutes watching the movie. Then, and maybe have a notepad, kind of take some notes as you're watching it, but really, watch the movie. And then think about, okay, how could I analyze this film? In other words, you may not want to go in with how you're going to analyze it before you even watch the movie, because what you're deciding to do may not fit this movie. So again, my advice is watch it, think about it, then the next day, watch it again. But the next time you watch it, that's when you need to be taking notes and thinking about it. Um, so let me switch to the PowerPoint real quick. Let's see, let me start it. Oh, hold on. Let me my PowerPoint's acting weird. Like I said, I didn't I didn't I didn't plan this very well. Okay. Share, and then let me actually start the PowerPoint. And let me talk out loud while I'm doing it. Okay. So now I can't see myself on the screen. So hopefully, but that might be a good thing. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about analyzing films. So some of the topics you could talk about, and I'm going to spend a little time on one of these, but because today in class I talked about gender. I seem to be going back to gender a lot in this class, more than I do in other classes, but you can look at gender in the film. And you can use more than one of these. You don't have to just necessarily talk about one topic, but you can look at gender, and I'm going to come back to that. How is race or ethnicity? Ethnicity just means culture. How is that portrayed in films? And these in the film you're watching. You can look at the technology in the film. I mean, again, like think about like if you're watching a film from 1984, like imagine this is the only thing you have from 1984. What could you learn about life in America in 1984 from this movie, including the use of technology. I mean, you're not going to see a cell phone in one of these. Think about what kinds of phones they're using. What do the cars look like? How does technology play a role in the story? Another way to think about it is if there was a cell phone, would it change the plot of the movie? So many old movies are dependent on like finding a payphone or not being able. I mean, every horror film would not be a horror film if they could just call the police and go, "Hey, there's a killer outside my house." Because back then, nobody had a cell phone. You couldn't just do that. Anyway, so technology could be something. How are computers portrayed in the film? Or again, if the internet was around, how might that change the movie? Does the movie have, and again, you don't have to do all of these. Like I say, you can pick one, you can pick three. The politics of the film. We looked at Dirty Harry, and again, I don't know if anybody actually watched the movie, even though I posted it, but that movie definitely had politics. It was making a comment on society in 1971 about crime and, the lack of police freedom to take care of crime, right? It was a film about vigilante violence. I mean, it was actually saying something. Not all films are going to do that, but sometimes films have politics that are unintentional. Sometimes they are commenting on society, even if the filmmakers aren't aware that they're commenting. Um, again, humor. All humor is making fun of somebody. I mean, I try in class to, make fun of myself. I try not to make fun of you guys. I do make fun of myself a lot, right? But there's always going to be the group or the person that's being made fun of, and then another group or a character who's doing the laughing, right? So who, are they punching up? Are they punching down? Which group are again being made fun of? And again, you can think about this, like I said a moment ago. Who are the heroes? Who are the villains? You can think about it from the viewpoint of race or class or you know like if you're watching an old Western from like the 40s, the Native Americans are going to be the villains. But if you're watching a Western from the 80s, almost never will Native Americans be villains because society had changed. This is not something I would be good at writing about, but fashion. I mean, the way people dressed, the way they ate, the furniture in the background. Um, and again, that kind of unintended information. I'm going to come back to that in just a second, but there's a lot of information in these films. I mean, they are literally photographs, right? They're 24 frames per second. There's sounds in these films that are a product of their time. The way a phone sounds, or the way a car, the cars sounded, or how music sounded. I mean, again, there's a lot of stuff in these films that was just life at that time. But now looking back, it's again, it's like a window into, it's like a time machine. You're looking back at a different time. And again, how is violence used in it, or what is the comment about crime, or and again, just the various subject matter of the film beyond stuff I have here. How is sex handled? How or is it handled? How like if it's a love story, I think that's where sometimes things get really problematic. The way maybe a female character tries to attract a male character, or how are people who are gay or other sort of groups, how are they portrayed in the film, right? What language? How are they talking about people? It could be racial language, it could be humorous language, the use of profanity. I mean, just there's so many ways you could approach this, so there's no one way. Um, I, I think that one of the people emailed me today, I think was asking me about this, the Bechdel test. I think one of you knew what this was. So real quick, I teach a class on, in fact, I think I'm teaching it this spring, a class on superheroes. And it's mostly looking at comic books, but also movies and kind of analyzing comics. Like what does, just like we do in movies. I mean, it's basically the whole class that looks at comics and movies about superheroes and TV shows about superheroes. And what can it tell us about America in the 20th century? So anyway, there was a comic book artist, I think she's still around, named Alison Bechdel. She was kind of an underground comic artist. And in the 90s, she kind of wrote this little joke cartoon, but she was joking, not joking. And so and this kind of caught on, and a lot of readers, thought, oh, she's really on to something. And so it's kind of become known as the Bechdel test. If you want to pause the screen, you can read the original comic. I meant to put this earlier. So I'm going to talk about gender as just one way to look at movies, right? So the Bechdel test kind of boils down to you can ask three questions. Now, again, this is about female representation in movies. This worked better in the 70s and 80s than it does today because filmmakers are very aware of this. So anyway, the three questions are number one, does the movie have more than one main, not like a background character, but like a main character that's a female? So for instance, the original Star Wars, which I grew up watching, uh, they would already fail. No, because there's only Princess Leia. That's it. There's no other females in that whole movie. In fact, all three of the original Star Wars films only had one female character the whole time. So, but if you're watching another movie, you might go, okay, yeah, there's another female character. So the second question is, do those characters actually talk to each other? Do they have at some point, do they have a conversation with each other? And again, so many movies, the women back then were like the girlfriends or the wives, they didn't actually ever have a conversation. But so if the answer is yes, then you go to the third and last question. When they do have a conversation, do they talk about something other than a guy? Because in movies, it's always like it seems like back in the day, it was always like the females are like, "How do I get my man back? What's wrong with my husband?" I mean, think about All in the Family when we watched that about 15-minute clip from the TV show. You had two female characters. I don't think they ever talked in the movie in that episode, and all they ever talked about was their husbands. So again, I mean, you can tell they're kind of sarcastic questions. It was meant as a joke, but again, it did reveal quite a bit about films. And like I said, it's kind of caught on. A lot of filmmakers today are very aware of this. So most movies and TV shows tend to try to pass the Bechdel test. Now, I will say right off the bat, um, if you're making a movie about the Vietnam War, there's probably not going to be any women in it. You know, not or you might make a film about, I don't know, a female orphanage. Well, you're not going to have any male characters. I mean, it always depends on the story. But in general, most stories should, of course, involve male and female. So that's kind of the comment is that movies too often, and people have actually analyzed movies over the years, and it is kind of interesting how many movies are mostly guys, and especially as lead characters. So anyway, I mean, again, this could be kind of an interesting capstone project, kind of, testing this out perhaps. So you can do the same thing. In fact, there's technically another name for it, but I can't remember. So I just threw this in here. But you can do this with race. It's are there exact same questions, just are there more than one? I'm using person of color here, just keep it short. But it's for instance, are there more than one black character? The original Star Wars? Nope. That's why, if for those of you who know those movies, Empire Strikes Back came out, they added one black character, Lando, just so they could at least say they have some, black characters, and then of course the answer is yes, do those black characters actually talk to each other? And again, would they talk about something other than the white characters in the movie? Even movies about slavery often don't really have the movies are often more about like the white own, like think Gone with the Wind. It's all about the white characters. The black characters are just in the background, and I don't think they ever talk to each other in that movie. Anyway, and you can do this for any group, actually. Whether are there characters who are gay? If they are, there are more than one of them. I mean, however you want to look at it. It doesn't have to always be that kind of, but that's just an interesting and kind of a fun way to look at a film. Getting back to people of color, um, very few films before the 90s, unless they were about slavery, actually had black characters. They were very rare in films. And usually it was one, and actually I think this is still often the case. There often was just like one character. And usually their role was all about helping white people. Even movies like The Green Mile or Shawshank Redemption. There's usually just the one person, and their whole purpose in the movie is to help the white character. Anyway, these are just one way to look at this. But since you guys are looking at films from the 70s and 80s and 90s, this might be a kind of a fun way to look at your film, especially if you're kind of stumped for something. Um, since I said I'd talk about gender for a minute, another thing, I'm sure you've heard of it before, there's something known as the male gaze. Now, this is from my superhero class, so it's a little bit, so the wording is really about superheroes, but um, again, most movies or comic books, the idea is that the viewer watching the movie is a guy. So like think about like sometimes love scenes. You know, they'll show the woman dressing very slowly to camera, especially like in the 80s. That was like the height of this. And they would spend a long time showing the woman undressing and the camera would go all the way down to her feet, or she'd be in the shower and they always make sure but then when the guy just take his clothes off. It's almost like they're going like, we don't want to see him, we want to see her. And that's what we mean by the male gaze, that the focus is all to please the guys in the audience. And I guess I should specify the straight guys in the audience who want to see the naked female. And especially for those of you who have 80s movies, I think you really might notice this, at least in some of the movies. So, and again, this is going back to my superhero class, but it kind of works for movies too. Another writer named Gail Simone, she actually she helped write the Wonder Woman movie a few years ago. So back in the 90s, she was online and she had a blog, and she kind of noticed in movies and comics that very often women were just sort of killed off fairly quickly. And I'll go back to that slide, even though you don't have to write all this down, obviously. But so there was a comic book, I believe it's the Green Lantern, back in like the 70s, and the character comes home and he sees a note and he's like, "What's this about?" And then it says, "Look at the fridge," and then, oh my God, his girlfriend is in the fridge dead. And of course that spurs him on to take revenge. And Gail Simone, when she read this, she was just like, well, what about her? Like, it's just like, oh, kill her. We don't care about the girlfriend. It's all about him and his reaction. And it is amazing how many action films, or like you have the lead character, male lead character, and they just kill off the female character so that he can get mad or get sad or something. And again, in comics, you see this, where the female characters are often the ones where the violence is done towards. Um, we saw again, we saw some clips from Dirty Harry, and I showed the clip where he shoots the guy and steps on his wound, you know. And if you remember, it was the the scene was they were trying to find this young girl. Um, oops. Oh man, I put these all out of order. Crap. Oh well. I told you I'm not going to re-record it. But anyway, and then it turns out the girl's dead, and you just see her getting taken out of a grave. It's like you don't know anything about the girl. You don't. She was. Sometimes they call it being fridged, is the terminology used. So sometimes this is not, again, getting back to gender. Sometimes this can be kind of an interesting thing, like which characters are killed off, which characters survive, even away from gender. Just I mean, that's what is that saying about expectations of audiences at that time? And it is true, women in movies tend to die more than the men do, very casually, or people of color tend to die. Again, in Dirty Harry, he's shooting all the black bank robbers, like whatever. We don't care about those people. Anyway, it doesn't always have to be about this kind of stuff. I mentioned a moment ago about unintended information in films. This is older than the films you're watching. I love old black and white films. And Harold Lloyd was a famous silent film comedian star. You've probably seen this image before. He's famous for doing these crazy stunts. Um, but his films and other silent films, they were filmed in places like New York and LA, and sometimes they were even filmed in Georgia and Florida. And like, look at this image. I mean, and this is, he really is doing this, even though there is a platform that you can't see below him, but still, he's really doing this. And so you look in the background. In fact, you can see some people looking up at him. You see the cars, you can see the names of stores, you can see the architecture. When they made this film, they were just filming it, but now we can go, that's a world that doesn't exist anymore. Again, there's stuff there. And in fact, specifically with Harold Lloyd, there's a couple of these books. There's one about Charlie Chaplin as well. where the whole book is where they've looked at these films, but not so much about Harold Lloyd, but what's happening in the background. Again, the cars, the architecture, because most of these cities have completely changed over the years, and none of these buildings exist anymore. And again, there's all this information. So some of the movies you're watching, especially the ones that are filmed in the real world, same thing. Now, I'm not saying you can find much, but it is an interesting way of thinking about films. So I watched a few films just in the last couple of weeks. I'm working on a book from the 70s. I've been watching a lot of movies from the 70s. And I mentioned the year 1977. I said that because I watched literally in the last few days, I watched two films from 1977. One, I literally just watched it the other day. It's a terrible movie. I do not recommend it. Called Demon Seed, and it kind of means what you think it means. Although there's no demons in it, but it's about a world where you have artificial intelligence. This is again as envisioned in 1977. You have a guy who's invented this super smart computer, um, and that computer wants to be smarter and wants to control things. And so it gets access to their home computer. And again, this is a time when most people didn't have computers. And creepy part, it actually manages to sexually assault and rape the wife of the inventor and impregnate her, hence the title, uh, with his child. you know. Yeah, it's as sleazy as it sounds. And it's a terrible movie, but it's fascinating too, because this was a major mainstream movie. Again, this is what the baby looks like at the end. But again, the way but even if you didn't care about the plot, I mean, the way computers are portrayed, how they envision the future to be, what technology they thought was going to look like, and some of it's not inaccurate, you know. But anyway, but you can have a lot of fun with a silly movie like this. And I mean, I'm not going to, there is a blatant shower scene. I always joke women took more showers in movies from the 70s and 80s that, and again, it's the male gaze, right? There's no need to show her in the shower. They just like, oh, we can do a quick nude shot. So again, think about how things are portrayed. It doesn't always have to be that, but think about things that are portrayed. Another film from the exact same year, a movie called Semi-Tough, with Burt Reynolds and Chris Christopherson, and one of my favorite actresses, who's not very well known anymore, Jill Clayburgh. It was actually based on a best-selling novel. So again, think about what movie you're watching. Think about, read up a little bit on it. Is it based on a novel? Is it based on a play? Where did they get this movie from? This was based, again, a comical novel called Semi-Tough. It's a film. Oh, by the way, this is the other movie poster for it, the really sleazy movie poster. I prefer the one on the left. The one on the right looks horrible. Anyway, so again, very male gazy, and the audience is trying to attract. Um, I mean, these are pretty good actors. It's another not a very good film. Burt Reynolds, of course, on the right, and Chris Christopherson, who's really a singer that did some acting. They play friends who are football stars. So it has a lot of sports in it. So again, it's how sports are portrayed, a lot with the media in it. And again, how was fame portrayed back then? There's a lot of male humor, a lot of guys joking. So again, there's a lot to analyze from how they talked about women, how they talked about each other. There's a lot of very politically, even at the time, politically incorrect humor, a lot of racial humor, most of it pretty ugly. But they're two guys, they're best friends. They live together with a girl that's their old childhood friend. Uh, they're not quite swingers, but there's a lot of sexual politics in it. It's very much about 1977. There's even stuff about like self-help movements. This would actually be, except for it's a little sleazy, wouldn't be a bad one to analyze because there's a ton of stuff you can analyze in it. What I would focus on, other than the humor, is more the sexual politics of it, I think. How are men and women talking to each other and stuff. By the way, Joe Clayburgh's a great actress, and there's another film from 1979 that I just highly recommend called Unmarried Woman. That's a very serious look at women. It's funny too, but about what women's lives were like in the 70s and what it was like to be married and then get divorced, things like that. Another film that I've seen recently that's from 77 or 78, a movie called Looking for Mr. Goodbar, which is also based on a novel, but was also based on a true story. It's essentially about a young woman, Diane Keaton, who she's a teacher, she's single, she's going to what they used to call singles bars, she's going to discos, she's having a lot of casual sex, and I'll go ahead and spoil it for you. And she ends up getting brutally murdered at the end, and it's really, really shocking. It's a very good film. It's a disturbing film, but it's a very well made film. And again, it was very much commenting on about how women were treated, about rise of crime, again about sexual politics. But again, a lot of unintended information in there. It's a hard film to find because it has an amazing soundtrack. It's just all this music. You can see how people danced, the fashions of the time. Again, these are people just a little bit older than you guys. I mean, there are people in their late 20s, and so how do they behave? The slang terms, um, again, you can learn a lot about them. Oh, there's the image that was from Dirty Harry, the girl that he's trying to save, but you never know anything about him. Anyway, I know I went on longer than I even meant to, but that's just some ways you can think about these movies. There's no rules here as far as how you want to analyze it. But again, put on your historian goggles, look at the film from the viewpoint of what can I learn about that time period through this film. And you don't even have to use the topics. Like I said, I focused a lot on gender here, but you don't have to even do that. Okay, that's it. I'll quit sharing, but I'm done. So if you hung out this long. Anyway, good luck with it. I actually really looking forward to these. I enjoy reading these a lot. And I will see you guys next week.